you go.
Hello, my name is Howard Saucier. I'm a member of First Presbyterian Church in Rockwall, Texas. This is a time for young disciples. We have a godly play story. Are you ready to enter into godly play? Do you remember? We need to be quiet and calm to enter into godly play because we are here to worship God. Are you ready? There was a man that lived in Bethlehem named Jesse. Jesse was the grandson of Ruth. Jesse had many sons. One day, the prophet Samuel came to Bethlehem looking for his next king. God sent Samuel to Jesse's house, telling him he would find his king there. Jesse brought out his 6 oldest sons for Samuel to meet, but he didn't see a king among them. He asked Jesse if he had any more sons. He thought, well, the youngest, David, is out watching the flock. So they sent for David. The second Samuel saw him, he knew this was his next king. Samuel took a horn of oil, similar to the oil in this. He poured it onto David's head and anointed him king. It's a little confusing because there's already a king in the land, King Saul. But Saul had changed. An evil spirit was tormenting him. Still, David wouldn't rule until Saul died. As Saul became sicker, some of his doctors, his advisors, decided maybe music would help soothe the king, help calm him. So they sent for the shepherd boy David. David would play the harp and sing songs to Saul to help calm him. Some of these songs you can find in the Bible, in the book of Psalms. While David was still a young boy, there was a war in the land. The Philistines had come and wanting to capture the land for themselves. The army of the people of God had lined up, and the army of the Philistines had lined up, and they faced each other ready to do battle. One of the Philistine soldiers, a big, tall man, like a giant named Goliath, he stepped out and challenged the soldiers of Saul's army to hand-to-hand combat. None of the soldiers would answer his challenge. I think they were a little scared of him. When David heard this, he answered the challenge. They tried to put the king's armor on David, but it was too big and heavy, so he cast it aside. Instead, David went to do battle, carrying 5 smooth stones. His slingshot and his shepherd's staff. He had killed bears and lions while defending the sheep. He figured he could kill Goliath to defend the people. And he did. The people will never forget David's bravery. When he grew old enough, he became a soldier in the king's army. The king had many sons. One of them, named Jonathan, became really good friends with David. Jonathan would look after David and try to help protect him, even from his own father, the king. King Saul had become jealous of David. David had become a great soldier and very popular with the people, even more popular than the king. This made Saul angry. He decided he would have David killed. Jonathan went to his father and tried to explain David was a good man and had served him well in his army. But King Saul wouldn't hear it. So Jonathan decided the only way to protect his friend was to send him away, to have him hide from the king, even though it meant he would never see his good friend again. The king and his sons went to battle one more time against the Philistines. This time the king and all of his sons were killed. David was traveling through the countryside when a young man found him and brought him the news of the king's death and all of his sons. David was filled with sorrow. He would never forget his good friend Jonathan. And in the future, when he became king, he would actually take Jonathan's own son into his own home and raise him like his own. And he would give him the lands that belonged to King Saul. It was time for David to become king. The young man who had brought him the news had also brought him the king's crown. All the tribes of Israel gathered in Hebron, and there they made David king, saying that he shall be shepherd of the people. One of the first things David did was take his army to Jerusalem and take it back from the Jebusite people who had captured it in an earlier battle. Then he remembered the Ark of the Covenant. It had been captured by the Philistines. So he led his army against the Philistines, defeated them, and carried the Ark back to Jerusalem. David danced in front of the Ark as it was carried into the tent to sit like it had when the people were in the desert. David wanted to build a temple to God, a better place to keep the Ark. But God told him no, he would be remembered as a king of war. Someday his son would build the temple. In the spring of the year is usually when the kings send their armies out to do battle. And this year, David did the same, but he stayed back in Jerusalem. One afternoon, he spotted a woman, the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Her name was Bathsheba. He decided he wanted her for his wife. The problem was Bathsheba was already married to Uriah the Hittite. David arranged for Uriah to be in the first row of his soldiers in the next battle, and there he was killed. Then David married Bathsheba. Not long after this, the prophet Nathan came to see David, and he told him a parable. There was a rich man and a poor man that lived in the same town. The rich man had many sheep. The poor man had one little lamb that he fed from his own table and raised like his own children. One day, the rich man had visitors, and the custom then was to throw a feast and feed the visitors, to slaughter a lamb to do that. Well, the rich man didn't want to kill one of his sheep, so he took the lamb of the poor man and served it to his visitors. King David was furious when he was mad at that rich man in the story. Told him, as God lives, this man needs to be put to death. He needs to pay 4 times over the cost of that lamb for this horrible thing he has done, and that he has no pity. Nathan looked at David and told him, "You are the rich man. God has given you everything, and yet you took Uriah's wife for your own." David was full of sorrow. He was afraid maybe he would end up dying like King Saul had. David didn't die, but his first son with Bathsheba did die. He and Bathsheba was full of sorrow. But their next son lived. They named him Solomon. He would be the next king. and he would be the one who built the house for God. David made many mistakes as a king, just like we do today. But he understood that, and he always went to God to ask for forgiveness, and God would forgive him. When David was full of years, he died and was buried in Jerusalem. Solomon became the next king, and he ruled for many years with great wisdom, and he was the one who built the temple to God. I wonder, what part of the story do you like best? I wonder, what part of the story do you think is most important? I wonder, where would you be in the story? Thank you for joining me as we learn more about the story of King David. Until next time, be good, be safe, and be kind to one another. God bless.